At the break of day on August 24, 2000, the images of wreckage from a passenger plane spread around the world. A modern airplane, one of the safest in the skies, had just suffered a devastating accident. Fragments of plane were pulled from the waters off the coast of Bahrain in the Middle East. The night before, disaster struck Gulf Air Flight 72. The lives of everyone on board were at the mercy of a series of misjudgments and a deadly phenomenon that can lurk in the dark. What happened on that plane? Something took the lives of 143 people, and today we're going to uncover just what that was. Before we get to the events of the accident though, I feel it is important to lay out some information regarding the actual plane we're going to be talking about today. If you have ever travelled by air in the last 30 years, statistically there is a pretty good chance that the plane you flew on belongs to the Airbus A320 family of airplanes. A total of 4 main variants of this plane, that has seen a number of upgrades over the years, have carried billions of people all over the world. The Airbus A320 is one of the most popular airliners ever. Launching in the late 1980s, the plane boasted some very impressive technology for the time. Airbus, a relative newcomer to the aviation market in the 1980s, was certainly a very ambitious organization. Beginning with the A300 series in the 1970s, Airbus sought to develop an additional range of airplanes to compete in the short-haul market. They wanted to take on the ever-popular Boeing 737. What Airbus came up with was a revolutionary plane, to say the least, the likes of which had never been seen before. The A320 was one of the first commercial airliners that utilized a fly-by-wire control system. This is a very computerized plane. The pilots, instead of using a control wheel that is connected directly to hydraulic or pulley control systems, the Airbus pilot's side stick, as it's called, is connected to a computer, which sends the instructions in the form of electrical signals to the individual hydraulics that command the flight control surfaces. Given that this was certainly a leap into a more computerized way of flying, Airbus took the initiative to increase safety further by incorporating protection systems designed to step in and override pilot inputs. The plane, for example, can detect when the aircraft is operating close to the edge of the flight envelope and make the corrective maneuvers without input from the pilot. Say if the Airbus computer thinks it's approaching a stall scenario, it will intervene by pitching the nose down and applying thrust. Fly-by-wire is a term used to describe how the plane controls. It's not to be confused with autopilot. Just like any other commercial plane, the A320 can be hand-flown for those times when it's needed. And Airbus planes tend to control unlike others, due to lack of forced feedback from the flight controls. All this is to say that the Airbus A320 has been an incredibly successful plane. Over 10,000 of these planes have been built across all variants, and the newer generation A320s by Airbus look to cement Airbus's position in aviation for future decades. This brings us to Gulf Air, the national air carrier of Bahrain, a tiny island nation in the Middle East wedged between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Gulf Air first received their first A320s in 1992. The accident plane, Alpha 4 Oscar Echo Kilo, was delivered in 1994. Gulf Air used the A320s on many of their regional flights across the Arab world. Gulf Air, by many measures, is a respectable airline and has even had a pretty decent safety record. On August 23, 2000, this Gulf Air Airbus A320 departed Cairo in Egypt at just before 5 p.m. On board were 135 passengers, most of them Egyptian, Bahraini, or Saudi. Many passengers had also connected from other flights in Cairo. 8 members of crew, 6 flight attendants, and 2 pilots were also on the flight, for a total of 143 people on the plane. The 2 pilots in command of the airliner were 37-year-old Captain Ihsan Shakib and 25-year-old First Officer Khalaf Saeed Al-Alawi. Captain Shakib first joined Gulf Air in 1989, where he became familiar with the Lockheed TriStar. Working as a first officer, he transferred to the Boeing 767, then later the A320, where he was eventually promoted to captain, just 2 months before the accident. Out of nearly 4,500 flight hours, around 1,000 of those were in the Airbus. His first officer, as already mentioned, was much younger. In fact, he was brand new to the job. With a total of just 600 flight hours to his name, the first officer had spent most of that time in the A320. Perhaps curiously, the first officer's flying experience doesn't appear to date all that far back. In July of 1999, the previous year, he applied as a cadet into Gulf Air's training program with little previous flying experience. In a matter of just a few months, Al-Alawi was put through airliner training and then put into a first officer's position flying the Airbus A320, just a few months before the accident. Flying as Flight 072, the Gulf Air plane made its way southeast, crossing the Arabian Peninsula pretty much uneventfully. They were expected to arrive in the tiny island country of Bahrain at around 7:30 that evening. It was during the landing attempt where things went wrong. 7:20 in the evening. It was the perfect evening for flying. The weather conditions were clear, with a light breeze from the east. Gulf Air Flight 72 was in communication with controllers in Saudi Arabia, specifically a controller for Dammam approach. They gave a set of approach instructions that included self-navigation to the airport in Bahrain. The pilots requested runway 12, the approach from the north, to which the controller approved. There was a great deal of communication between Bahrain and Dammam in Saudi Arabia. In fact, the Dammam approach controller previously worked in the Bahrain tower. Flight 72 was handed over to Bahrain approach, where they then gave the pilots instructions to fly direct to the runway and descend down to 3,500 feet. Around this time, the pilots set about performing some checklists and preparing the aircraft for landing. So we'll now jump to when they were expecting to land. 7:25, 9 miles from the runway. Captain Shakib instructed his first officer to contact Bahrain Tower, where they then received the landing clearance. They were descending their plane down further from 3,500 feet to just 1,500 in accordance with the instrument approach. Things were already drifting out of the ordinary, as the pilots noticed during their descent and approach to the airport that they were flying too fast. For a safe landing to be executed, pilots need to have stable control of their plane. Part of that means bringing the speed right the way down to a suitable landing speed. One way to slow a plane down is to extend the flaps. The flaps not only provide a greater deal of lift from making the wing physically bigger, but also produce drag that slows the plane down. There are, however, and this is something to keep in mind for later, there are overspeed limits to the flaps. So, as in this case, because the plane was over that limit, the flaps could not be extended yet. They needed to slow down. On the Airbus A320, flaps cannot be extended if the plane has an airspeed greater than 230 knots. Flight 72's airspeed at just 9 miles from touchdown was over 310 knots, exceptionally fast. 7:26, 7 miles from the runway, altitude just over 1,700 feet. The airspeed had decreased down to roughly 270 knots, but this was still too great a speed. Excessive airspeed translated into a higher altitude than desired for lining up with the runway. At 7 miles from the airport, they should have been at 1,500. They were 200 above that. So, to cut it short, Gulf Air Flight 72 was too high and too fast. Regardless though, the pilots still continued the approach, and they even set the reference speeds for landing. Their target airspeed was 136 knots. Again, to highlight, they were well above this. 5 miles from the runway. Altitude had only decreased by roughly 50 feet. Airspeed, on the other hand, had now reached 224 knots, and the first stage of flap was requested. Because the plane was now decelerating, the Airbus was put into another descent, where Flight 72 reached 1,000 feet at 3 miles. And it was at this point that the captain went on record with the following words: "We have to be established by 500 feet. We're not going to make it." It was clear that the captain knew that the approach was unstable. It happens from time to time, and it's not like the plane was in any kind of dire problem at this point. But it's what happened next that set the events in motion for disaster. 1 mile from the runway, altitude 584 feet, airspeed 177 knots. Captain Shakib began performing a left 360-degree turn, otherwise known in aviation as an orbit. The logic here was that delaying the landing and extending the flying time, the aircraft could expend some of that altitude and airspeed. During the turn, the pilots would extend the flaps to their full setting. It is unusual for the orbit to be done this close to the airport and at such a low altitude. As it would turn out, investigators would later discover that the captain broke standard operating procedures by doing this. Air traffic controllers in Bahrain and Dammam would later recall watching the plane on radar, noting how their orbit was a very tight turn. 728. With the flaps fully extended but still in that tight orbiting turn, the pilots ran through the landing checklist, which was complete around halfway through the turn. Data recovered from the flight data recorder later revealed how the plane's altitude fluctuated massively, beginning the turn at around 600 feet, climbing upwards of 900 and descending as low as 300. For all of that effort, the 360-degree turn had actually failed. They overshot it. In fact, those were the exact words from the captain. The wings were leveled 3/4 the way through the turn, and the flight crew sought to execute a missed approach. Another left turn was commenced, with the plane flying directly overhead the Bahrain airport itself. The flaps were raised 1 step and maximum thrust was applied to the engines. The airspeed started to increase. As Flight 72 was passing overhead of the airport, the master caution alarm sounded in the cockpit. The alarm pertained to the plane's airspeed. Because the flaps were still extended and the plane was gaining speed, there was a reduced overspeed limit that the plane had now exceeded. Now for the viewers in the audience, you may have already looked at what has happened so far and picked up on the questionable flying decisions of the captain. What happened next, and bear in mind that the pilots had just initiated a go-around, what happened next is a bit unbelievable. To be charitable towards the captain for just a moment, I do believe it's necessary to give a bit more context to the situation, because what we're about to talk about is a real risk to pilots. It is strongly believed that the captain, the pilot flying, was experiencing the effects of spatial disorientation, more specifically, what is known as a somatographic illusion. This is where a pilot may suddenly lose all visual reference outside and perceive sensations that aren't actually there. Bahrain Airport sits in immediate proximity to the Persian Gulf. Flight 72 had now just flown out over the water at nighttime, quickly removing all visual references that would have been outside of their window. It's easy to forget when you live in well-lit populated areas that at nighttime, flying over the water, when looking out from a cockpit window, you can only see darkness. There is no distinguishing between the sea and the sky. From a pilot's perspective, it may look something like this. Note the absence of a clear horizon. Maximum thrust was applied, and the plane began accelerating rapidly. The somatographic illusion that is believed to have influenced the captain that night made him think the plane was pitching up, when it actually wasn't. Without visual references, rapid acceleration can create the sensation in the inner ear most associated with a pitching up motion. So a pilot may perceive this as the nose going up, when it actually isn't. It is believed that this is what happened to Captain Shakib, this coinciding with his attention being diverted to the flap overspeed warning, which perhaps led the captain to reach his own human limit and experienced information overload. This in turn could have distracted him from his instruments. With his left hand on the side stick, to counter this perceived and false raising of the nose, he pushed forward. The flight data recorder recorded the plane's nose pitching from around 5 degrees nose up to 15 degrees nose down. The captain would keep holding forward on the side stick for a total of 11 seconds, by which point the plane would impact the water. In that time, during its final descent, the ground proximity warning system gave indication that they were about to crash. Neither of the two pilots acknowledged it. In fact, it would appear that they were preoccupied with the flap overspeed situation. According to the cockpit voice recording transcript, they never acknowledged it at all. Moments later, the plane vanished from local radar. Gulf Air Flight 72 crashed into the shallow water roughly 2 miles off the coast of Bahrain at just after 7:30 in the evening. The plane impacted the water at high speed with a nose-down attitude. The force of the impact obliterated the plane and killed all 143 people on board immediately. Recovery teams later discovered the remains of what would appear to have been a 144th passenger. It was later determined that one passenger was pregnant, and these remains belonged to that of a fetus, not counted in the official death toll. The following day, wreckage was pulled from the water, and the images captured that day spread around the world. An Airbus A320, one of the most technologically advanced and safest planes in the skies, had crashed. For the small country of Bahrain, Flight 72 was the deadliest disaster to involve the country ever. Given what we've discussed so far, there may still be some unanswered questions that one may have. The training of pilots in crew resource management is supposed to promote effective communication between the pilots. So one of the more difficult questions to answer would be, why didn't the first officer intervene? We'll never know, really, but there are some interesting notes in the investigation that are worth laying out. As already mentioned, First Officer Khalaf Saeed al-Alawi had only been flying commercially for a matter of weeks. He was later described as being a rather reserved individual, perhaps even shy and timid, especially in social situations. Another pilot who flew with him noted he was competent with flying into airports with straightforward standard procedures, but struggled when it wasn't so straightforward. The investigation noting a recent incident at the time in Sana'a in Yemen in May of 2000, when First Officer al-Alawi found it difficult to land his plane due to different procedures with the airport. The pilots are dead. We don't know what they were thinking. But we know from the cockpit voice recording that the first officer never challenged his captain. Many have arrived at the conclusion that he may have felt too inexperienced to challenge his much senior captain. And to be forward with you, this is certainly not the only instant where this kind of social structure has played at least a contributing role. It is for that reason that hierarchies in the cockpit in the modern day are much more democratic and horizontal. New pilots are encouraged to engage with captains and challenge where appropriate. It's all about building the necessary communication so that when disagreements do arise, safety is put at the front. Gulf Air's own pilot training was criticized. The fly-by-wire system of the A320 relies on an instinctive pilot action upon hearing the ground proximity warning system. When the GPWS sounds, the pilot should immediately pull back on the side stick. It was one of the recovery requirements for the Airbus computer. This may explain why the plane, given its technology, never intervened itself. Therefore, Gulf Air's training was criticized for not adhering to the standard A320 procedures. If the captain knew he was supposed to do that immediately after hearing the warning, the plane would actually have recovered, and the accident would never have happened. Furthermore, according to the accident report, the pilots could have stabilized their approach in the first place if they adequately made use of the aircraft's speed brakes. Speed brakes are flaps on the wings that are raised upward to disrupt airflow and create substantial drag. You'll find pilots using them on landing, but they are often used during descent to slow down and are a very useful tool to pilots. The investigation into Flight 72 concluded that the pilots failed to adhere to standard operating procedures, noting everything from failing to stabilize their plane appropriately for landing and not executing a missed approach where appropriate, to the unusual orbit maneuver, to the final inputs of the flight controls. The somatographic illusion that occurred in the head of Captain Shakib that night has unfortunately claimed more lives in the years since. This deadly illusion is believed to have played at least a contributing role in the loss of a fly-Dubai Boeing 737 in Rostov, Russia in 2016, this being one of the more recent cases of such an incident. It's a story best saved for another day. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and be subscribed, as there is always a new video every Saturday. I'd been wanting to make this video for quite a long time actually. You could probably find some old community posts where I asked people if they could help me find the period accurate livery for the plane in the simulator or something like that. Eventually we got it, or rather I got tired of waiting and just made it myself, piecing it together from other assets. I think it turned out okay. Anyway, it is that time of the week where I must take a moment to thank my amazing patrons over on Patreon for their generous ongoing support to the channel. Their names are scrolling on the screen right now, so if you do see your name here, a massive thanks to you. We've got 3 shoutouts this week. A thank you to Nick Kaurpias, I hope I said that right. They pledged during the week, much appreciated, thank you so much. Also, thank you to RN_stud and Brotherman Bill for pledging at the highest tiers this week. You guys are amazing. I don't even know what to say other than you're legends. Thanks for the support. If you yourself would like to support the channel further and even get your name featured here at the end of the next video, you can join the Disaster Breakdown Patreon from just £1 per month, and the link to that will be in the pinned comment below. All patrons get early access to all new content 2 days before it goes out publicly on YouTube. That's where I'll end things this week. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you next weekend. Goodbye.